The dust storm rolled in without warning, obscuring the late afternoon sun and turning day to dusk across Virginia City, Nevada territory. Grace Fairchild clutched her tattered valise to her chest, her once fine dress now soiled from days of travel. The stagecoach had left her at the edge of town with nothing but fading hopes and bitter memories. She stumbled forward, the cruel words of her former fiancé still ringing in her ears. Damaged goods. Who would want you now? The year was 1875, and at 24, Grace found herself alone in mining country with no prospects and a ruined reputation. The scandal that had driven her from Boston society seemed to follow her like a shadow. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, and the dust caking her throat made each breath a struggle. "Miss, you all right there?" A voice cut through the howling wind. Grace turned to see a weathered woman standing in the doorway of a modest boarding house. The sign above read, "Widow Jensen's Lodgings." "I'm fine," Grace lied, straightening her back despite the weariness in her bones. "You don't look fine, child. Come inside before this dust chokes the life out of you." Grace hesitated. Her funds were nearly depleted and she couldn't afford lodging. "I don't have much money." The woman's expression softened. "Let's worry about that after you've had some hot food. Name's Martha Jensen." Inside, the boarding house was clean but sparse. The main room served as both dining area and parlor, with a few mismatched chairs gathered around a wooden table. A pot of something savory bubbled on the stove and Grace's stomach growled embarrassingly loud. "Sit," Martha commanded, already ladling stew into a bowl. "Eat now, talk later." Grace didn't need to be told twice. She ate ravenously, barely pausing to breathe between spoonfuls of the hearty rabbit stew. "Where you from?" Martha asked once Grace had slowed her pace. "Boston," Grace replied, reluctant to share more. "Long way from home. Looking for work, I suppose?" Grace nodded. "Anything respectable?" Martha's laugh held no humor. "Respectable jobs for women are scarce in Virginia City. There's laundry, cooking, or the saloons." "I can sew," Grace offered quickly, "and I was a teacher's assistant back home." Martha studied her thoughtfully. "Millicent over at the general store might need help. Her eyesight's failing and she can't manage the fine needlework anymore." She paused. "But lodging will cost you something. I run a decent place, not a charity." "I understand. I can work from my room until I find employment." "Fair enough. You can start by helping with the washing up." That night, Grace slept in a narrow bed in a small attic room. Despite its simplicity, it was clean and private, two luxuries she hadn't expected to find so easily. As she drifted toward sleep, she allowed herself a fragile hope that perhaps Virginia City might offer her a chance to rebuild. The following morning, Martha directed her to Millicent's general store. The establishment occupied a modest wooden building on C Street, its windows displaying an assortment of dry goods, tools, and fabrics. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, leather, and cotton. A white-haired woman squinted at a ledger behind the counter, holding it at arm's length. "Millicent," Martha called, "brought you someone who can sew." The elderly woman looked up, her faded blue eyes scrutinizing Grace. "That's so. Let me see your hands, girl." Grace extended her hands, which despite recent hardships still showed the refined shape of someone raised in privilege. But they also bore the calluses of recent manual work. Millicent nodded approvingly. "I've got mending piling up and can't see well enough for the fine work anymore. Pays not much, but it's honest. I'd be grateful for any work, madam." "Start with those." Millicent pointed to a basket of items needing repair. "If you do well, there might be more." Grace settled at a small table near the window and began sorting through the garments. Most needed simple repairs: torn seams, missing buttons, frayed cuffs. She worked quickly and precisely, Grateful for skills she once considered merely ornamental, the bell above the door jingled periodically as customers entered. Grace kept her head down, focusing on her work. She'd learned that attracting attention rarely ended well for a woman alone. Shortly after noon, the bell rang again. Heavy boots crossed the wooden floor, accompanied by the jingle of spurs. "Afternoon, Millicent," a deep voice called. "Got that order of fence wire in yet?" "Just came in yesterday, Mr. Fairmont. It's out back." Grace continued sewing, but something in the man's voice, warm and steady, made her glance up. He stood with his back to her, tall and broad-shouldered in a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt. His dark hat bore the marks of hard use. "And who might this be?" he asked, noticing Grace. "New girl. Does fine needlework," Millicent replied. "Grace from Boston." He turned, and Grace found herself looking into the most striking pair of green eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-weathered face. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but his features held a rugged nobility that made her breath catch. "Howard Fairmont," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Welcome to Virginia City." Grace nodded politely but returned to her sewing. Men like Howard Fairmont, men who owned land and ordered fence wire, weren't interested in destitute women with scandalous pasts. She'd learned that lesson painfully back in Boston. Over the next few weeks, Grace established a routine. Mornings and afternoons at Millicent's, evenings helping at the boarding house. The work was exhausting but honest, and she slowly began accumulating a small reserve of money. Martha had agreed to let her stay at a reduced rate in exchange for help with cooking and cleaning. Virginia City, she discovered, was a peculiar mix of frontier rawness and surprising sophistication. Silver from the Comstock lode had transformed what might have been just another mining camp into a booming city of nearly 15,000 souls. Opera houses stood alongside saloons, and European imports graced the shelves of merchants who also sold prospecting gear. Grace kept to herself, revealing little of her past. When questions arose, she deflected them with vague answers about seeking a fresh start after a family disagreement. Most people accepted this with a nod. Many had come west for similar reasons. Howard Fairmont appeared at the general store every few days. Grace learned from overheard conversations that he owned a modest ranch about 5 miles outside town. Unlike many ranchers who focused on cattle, Howard raised horses specifically, a cross between Mustangs and Eastern thoroughbreds that were prized for their endurance and intelligence. He always nodded politely to Grace, but never lingered to chat. She told herself she wasn't disappointed by this. A month into her stay, Virginia City held its annual Miners' Jubilee, a celebration of the silver that had built the town. Despite her usual reticence, Grace allowed Martha to convince her to attend. "You can't hide forever, child," the older woman said. "Besides, there'll be a crafts display where you could show your needlework. Might bring in some customers." The celebration transformed C Street. Bunting draped from buildings, musicians played on improvised stages, and the smell of roasting meat and baked goods filled the air. Grace had arranged a small display of her finest work handkerchiefs with delicate embroidery, a child's dress she'd remade from cast-off fabric, and some decorative pillowcases. As the afternoon wore on, several ladies stopped to admire her work and place orders. By evening, Grace had earned more than a week's wages and developed a modest list of clients. She was packing up her display when a commotion erupted nearby. A man's angry voice rose above the festival sounds. "That ain't no purebred. You're trying to cheat these good folks, Fairmont." Grace looked up to see Howard Fairmont standing calmly beside a magnificent bay horse. Facing him was a red-faced man Grace recognized as George Walton, owner of the Silver Pick Saloon. This stallion's bloodlines are well documented, Walton, Howard replied evenly. His grandsire was Lexington himself. Documentation can be forged, Walton sneered. Everyone knows you can't afford quality stock, not since you lost everything backing that failed silver claim. A small crowd had gathered, watching the confrontation with interest. Howard's face remained impassive, but Grace noticed his hands clench briefly at his sides. "I don't need to defend my horse's lineage to you," Howard said quietly. "Those who know horseflesh can see the truth." Walton's face darkened further. "You calling me ignorant?" His hand drifted toward his hip where a pistol was holstered. Grace froze. She'd heard about Western disputes ending in gunfire but had never witnessed such a confrontation. Before she could react, another man stepped between them. "That's enough, George," said Sheriff Mills, his badge catching the late afternoon sun. "Take your grievances elsewhere or spend the night in my jail." Walton glared but backed down. "This ain't over, Fairmont," he muttered before stalking away. The crowd dispersed, but Grace remained, her eyes drawn to Howard as he gently stroked the bay's neck, murmuring soothingly to the animal. There was something in that tender gesture that touched her, the care of a man who understood vulnerability. "Beautiful animal," she said before she could stop herself. Howard looked up, surprised to find her still there. "Thank you, Miss Fairchild." The fact that he remembered her surname made her flush slightly. "Vulcan here is the cornerstone of my breeding program." Was that true? About his bloodlines, a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Every word. Walton's just sore because I wouldn't sell him a mare he wanted." He paused. "You know horses, Miss Fairchild." "My father kept several in Boston," she admitted. "I rode daily until—" She trailed off, unwilling to complete the thought. Howard seemed to sense her discomfort and changed the subject. "Your needlework display impressed many today. Martha tells me you've quite a gift." "Martha talks too much," Grace said with a small smile, "but thank you." "Would you care to walk? I was about to get some lemonade." The invitation surprised her. She hesitated, then nodded. They strolled toward a refreshment stand, Vulcan trailing behind them, his lead rope loose in Howard's hand. "You don't tie him up?" Grace asked. "Vulcan follows where I lead." "We have an understanding." There was pride in his voice, but not boastfulness. As they walked, several townspeople greeted Howard with evident respect. Grace realized he was well regarded despite whatever financial setback Walton had alluded to. At the lemonade stand, Howard purchased 2 glasses. They found a quiet spot beneath a cottonwood tree at the edge of the festivities. "How are you finding Virginia City, Miss Fairchild?" Howard asked. "It's different from Boston," she replied cautiously. "Different bad or different good?" Grace considered this. "Just different. People are more direct here, less concerned with appearances." "Yet appearances still matter," Howard observed. "You've been careful to maintain yours." She stiffened. "What do you mean?" "Only that you work hard to present yourself as respectable, despite circumstances that must be challenging." His tone held no judgment. "It's admirable." Grace wasn't sure how to respond. She sipped her lemonade, studying him over the rim of her glass. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, evidence of years spent squinting against the Nevada sun. "What brought you west, Mr. Fairmont?" she asked, deflecting attention from herself. "The war," he answered simply. "Like many men, I found it difficult to return to normal life afterward. The West offered space to breathe." "You fought for the Union," he nodded. "Pennsylvania 83rd. Yourself? Where did your family's sympathies lie?" "My father supported the Union cause financially, though he hired a substitute when he was drafted." She felt a familiar shame at this admission. "My brother Thomas served, however. He didn't return." "I'm sorry," Howard said, and she believed he meant it. "The war took too many good men." They fell silent, the festive sounds around them a stark contrast to their somber thoughts. "I should return to the boarding house," Grace said finally. "It's getting late." Howard nodded. "May I walk you back?" The gesture was gentlemanly, and Grace found herself accepting. As they made their way through town, Howard kept a respectful distance, yet she was acutely aware of his presence beside her. At the boarding house steps, she turned to thank him. "Miss Fairchild," he said before she could speak, "I'm bringing some horses to town for sale next week. If you'd care to see them." He trailed off, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "I would like that," she replied, surprising herself. A smile transformed his face, softening the weathered features. "Until then." He touched his hat brim and led Vulcan away. Grace watched him go, a strange feeling stirring within her. It wasn't just attraction, though he was certainly compelling in his rugged way. It was the sense that Howard Fairmont truly saw her in a way no one had since she'd fled Boston. Inside, Martha raised an eyebrow at Grace's flushed cheeks, but asked no questions. That night, for the first time in months, Grace dreamed not of her past disgrace, but of open skies and the sound of hoofbeats across sun-drenched plains. The following week brought an unexpected trial. Grace was returning from delivering a mended shirt when a familiar figure emerged from the Silver Pick Saloon. Her blood turned to ice as she recognized Randall Pierce, her former fiancé's business associate. She ducked her head and quickened her pace, but it was too late. Grace Fairchild." Randall called, his Boston accent conspicuous among the frontier drawls. She reluctantly stopped, maintaining a careful distance. "Mr. Pierce. Well, isn't this a surprise?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Everyone in Boston believes you've gone to live with your mother's cousins in Philadelphia. That was the story my father preferred to circulate." Randall stepped closer. He was impeccably dressed despite the dusty surroundings, his manner retaining the polished condescension of Boston society. "Does he know you're actually in this mining outpost?" The way he said it made Virginia City sound like a leper colony. "My father made it clear I was no longer his concern," Grace replied stiffly. "What brings you to Nevada, Mr. Pierce?" "Silver investments." "Even a scandal can't stop commerce," he smirked. "Though I must say finding you here is an unexpected dividend. Wait until I tell Edward." The mention of her former fiancé sent a chill through Grace. "Please don't. What happened is in the past." "Is it? Such a sordid affair." A respected debutante caught in a compromising position with her fiancé's driver. The gossip sustained Boston drawing rooms for weeks. Grace felt sick. The truth was far different from the story that had circulated, but who would believe her word against Edward's? The driver had been paid well to corroborate Edward's version of events after he'd changed his mind about marrying Grace. "Excuse me, Mr. Pierce. I have work to attend to." She tried to move past him. Randall caught her arm. "Perhaps we could come to an arrangement. Your situation appears humble. I could help with that in exchange for certain considerations." His meaning was unmistakable. Grace wrenched her arm free. "I prefer my humble situation to any arrangement with you. Still proud despite your fall." His expression hardened. "Pride doesn't serve well for a woman in your position. No one will want you now, Grace, not once they learn of your past. Is there a problem here?" Howard Fairmont's voice was calm but carried an unmistakable edge. He stood a few paces away, his hand resting casually near the revolver at his hip. Randall assessed Howard with a dismissive glance. "A private conversation, sir. Nothing that concerns you." "Miss Fairchild." Howard looked to Grace. "Everything all right?" Grace hesitated. Exposing her connection to Randall meant risking her past becoming common knowledge in Virginia City. Yet Howard's steady presence gave her courage. "Mr. Pierce was just leaving," she said firmly. Howard stepped closer. You heard the lady. Randall's face flushed with anger, but he recognized the implicit threat in Howard's stance. We'll continue this discussion another time, Grace, he said before walking away. When he was out of earshot, Grace released a shaky breath. Thank you. No need for thanks, Howard replied. That fellow seemed to be disturbing you, an acquaintance from Boston. Howard studied her face. Not a pleasant association, I gather. No, she managed a weak smile. Actually, I was on my way to see your horses. Martha mentioned you'd brought them to the livery stable today. If Howard noticed her obvious attempt to change the subject, he didn't comment on it. I'd be honored to show them to you. The livery stable was cool and dim after the bright Nevada sunshine. The familiar smells of hay, leather, and horses were oddly comforting to Grace, reminiscent of happier times. Howard had brought 5 horses to town, 3 mares and 2 geldings. All showed the distinctive blend of Mustang hardiness with thoroughbred elegance that characterized his breeding program. They're magnificent, Grace said, genuinely impressed as she ran a hand along a chestnut mare's sleek neck. This one especially. Howard beamed with pride. Aurora's one of my favorites. She has her sire's intelligence and her dam's gentle temperament. He spoke about each horse with such knowledge and affection that Grace found herself drawn as much to his passion as to the animals themselves. His calloused hands moved with surprising gentleness as he demonstrated points of conformation and special traits. You truly love them, she observed. They saved me after the war, he said simply. When nothing else made sense, working with horses did. The statement resonated deeply with Grace. She too was searching for something that made sense after her world had collapsed. Would you like to ride her? Howard asked suddenly. Aurora, I mean. There's a meadow just outside town where I exercise them. Grace hesitated. It had been over a year since she'd been on horseback. I'm not dressed for riding. Aurora won't mind, Howard smiled, and neither will I. 20 minutes later, they were riding side by side along a trail that followed the Carson River. Grace rode astride rather than side saddle, her skirts hiked scandalously high to accommodate the position. In Boston, such an arrangement would have been unthinkable. Here, with the wind in her hair and the powerful movement of the mare beneath her, Grace found herself caring little for propriety. They reached a meadow dotted with late summer wildflowers. Without discussion, they both urged their mounts into a gallop across the open space. Grace's laugh, the first genuine one in longer than she could remember, carried away on the breeze. When they finally slowed, Grace's cheeks were flushed, and her carefully pinned hair had come loose, tumbling down her back. Howard looked at her with an expression that made her heart race faster than their gallop had. You're a natural horsewoman, he said. Aurora doesn't take to just anyone. They dismounted near a cluster of cottonwood trees beside the river. Howard produced a canteen of water which they shared while the horses grazed nearby. Your friend from Boston, Howard said carefully. He upset you. It wasn't a question, but Grace answered anyway. He represents a life I left behind. Forcibly, it seems. She looked away. We all have pasts, Mr. Fairmont. Howard, he corrected gently. And yes, we do. Some weigh heavier than others. Mine would shock the good people of Virginia City. You might be surprised at what wouldn't shock folks here. Many came west to escape something, debt, the law, heartbreak. Few ask questions about what came before. Grace picked at a wildflower, twirling it between her fingers. It's different for a woman. Our reputations are all we have. Howard was quiet for a long moment. I won't pry, Miss Fairchild, but whatever brought you here, it led you to Aurora. And to this meadow on a fine autumn day. His smile was warm. Perhaps that counts for something. The simplicity of his perspective touched her. Perhaps it does, Howard. They stayed by the river until the sun began its descent toward the Sierra Nevada mountains, talking of inconsequential things, books they'd read, places they'd seen, the quirks of Virginia City residents. Grace found herself relaxing in Howard's company in a way she hadn't with anyone since before her scandal. As they rode back to town in the golden light of late afternoon, Grace felt a tentative peace settle over her. The encounter with Randall had shaken her, but it hadn't shattered this new, fragile sense of belonging she was beginning to feel. That night at the boarding house, Martha cornered her in the kitchen. "Saw you riding out with Howard Fairmont today," she said, stirring a pot of beans. "Quite the picture you two made." Grace focused on kneading bread dough. "He was kind enough to show me his horses." Martha's knowing tone spoke volumes. "Howard doesn't show his horses to just anyone. Man's been alone too long since his wife died." Grace's hands stilled. "I didn't know he was married. Years ago, influenza took her and their infant son during that bad winter of '68. He doesn't speak of it." This new information settled heavily in Grace's mind. Howard understood loss, then not just the collective grief of war, but the intimate sorrow of personal tragedy. Perhaps that explained the quiet compassion she sensed in him. "He's a good man," Martha continued. "One of the best in these parts despite his troubles." "Troubles?" Martha hesitated. "Not my story to tell, but he's weathered them with dignity, which is more than can be said for many." Grace wanted to press for details but recognized Martha's reluctance to gossip. Instead, she returned to her bread-making, thoughts swirling with new questions about Howard Fairmont. The following days brought no further sightings of Randall Pierce, for which Grace was grateful. She maintained her routine of sewing at the general store and helping at the boarding house, but her thoughts often drifted to Howard and their afternoon ride. Autumn progressed, bringing cooler temperatures and the scent of pinyon pine smoke from chimneys throughout town. Grace's sewing business flourished as residents prepared for winter, mending and altering warmer clothing. Her savings grew modestly, enough that she began to imagine a more permanent future in Virginia City. Howard appeared at the general store one crisp October morning, his breath visible in the cool air. He carried a package wrapped in brown paper. "Miss Fairchild," he greeted her formally, aware of Millicent's curious gaze. "I wondered if you might be able to repair this." He placed the package on her work table. Grace unwrapped it to find a fine wool coat, well made but showing signs of wear. The lining was torn in several places, and some of the outer seams had begun to unravel. "It can be mended," she confirmed, "though the lining might need replacing entirely." "Whatever you think best. There's no rush." He paused. "I'm hosting a harvest gathering at my ranch this Saturday." "Nothing fancy, just neighbors sharing food and music before winter sets in. I'd be honored if you'd attend." The invitation surprised her. Such social engagements typically required an escort, a detail Howard surely understood. "Martha's coming," he added, as if sensing her hesitation. "She could accompany you if propriety is a concern." Grace considered refusing. Getting closer to Howard meant risking her heart in ways that terrified her, yet the memory of their ride together, the freedom and joy she'd felt, was compelling. "I'd like that," she said finally. "Thank you." His smile was worth the risk. "I'll send my wagon for you both at midday." True to his word, a wagon appeared at the boarding house promptly at noon on Saturday. The driver was Howard's ranch hand, Miguel, who helped Grace and Martha aboard with courteous efficiency. Several other Virginia City residents were already seated in the wagon bed, including Millicent and the town school teacher. The ride to Fairmont Ranch took just under an hour. As they crested a hill, Grace got her first view of Howard's home, a modest but well-maintained ranch house nestled against a backdrop of rugged hills. Corrals and outbuildings spread in a practical arrangement, with pastures beyond where horses grazed peacefully. Not what you expected, Martha asked, noticing Grace's intense study of the property. I didn't know what to expect, Grace admitted. The harvest gathering was larger than Howard had implied. At least 30 people had assembled in the yard, where tables groaned under the weight of food. A makeshift dance floor had been created near a group of musicians tuning fiddles and guitars. Howard greeted them as they descended from the wagon. He was dressed in his best clothes, clean black trousers, a pressed white shirt, and a vest that had seen better days but was clearly well cared for. "Welcome to my home," he said, his eyes lingering on Grace. "I'm glad you came." The afternoon unfolded pleasantly. Grace was introduced to Howard's neighbors, a mix of ranchers, miners, and tradespeople. They welcomed her without prying questions, accepting Howard's obvious regard for her as recommendation enough. After a hearty meal of roast beef, cornbread, and autumn vegetables, the musicians struck up lively tunes. Couples took to the dance floor, their movements creating dust clouds that glowed golden in the late afternoon sun. "Would you care to dance, Miss Fairchild?" Howard appeared at her side, hand extended. Grace hesitated. "It's been some time since I've danced. Fortunately, I'm not particularly skilled myself, so you'll be in good company." She placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her to the dance floor. The musicians were playing a Virginia reel, and Grace was grateful for the structured nature of the dance, which required little intimate contact. Still, each time their hands met in the pattern of the dance, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with physical exertion. As the afternoon waned into evening, the music slowed. Howard approached her again during a waltz. This time, when he placed his hand at her waist, the contact felt both thrilling and terrifying in its intimacy. "Your home is lovely," Grace said, searching for safe conversation. "It's modest compared to what you're accustomed to, I imagine." "Perhaps, but there's a peace here I never found in Boston's grand homes." Howard's green eyes studied her face. "You're very diplomatic, Miss Fairchild." "Grace," she corrected, echoing his earlier insistence on first names. "And I mean it sincerely. Your ranch has character like its owner." A pleased smile curved his mouth. "High praise indeed." They danced in comfortable silence for a while, the waltz allowing Grace to appreciate the solid strength of Howard's frame as he guided her through the steps with unexpected grace for a man who claimed little skill. "Would you like to see the horses?" he asked when the music ended. "Vulcan sired a foal last month that's showing exceptional promise." Grace nodded, grateful for a break from the crowd and curious to see more of Howard's breeding program. They walked together toward the stables, a respectable distance between them, though Grace was acutely aware of his presence at her side. The stable was warm and dim, lit by several hanging lanterns that cast a soft glow over the stalls. Howard led her to a box stall where a mare and foal rested on clean straw. "This is Calliope," Howard said, "and her son, Mercury." The foal was a rich bay with a white star on his forehead, leggy and alert despite his youth. He regarded the visitors with intelligent curiosity while his dam watched protectively. "He's beautiful," Grace murmured, genuinely impressed. "You can see Vulcan's influence in his conformation." "You have a good eye. Most wouldn't notice the subtleties yet." She smiled. "My father bred carriage horses. I spent more time in our stables than in drawing rooms, much to my mother's dismay. An uncommon upbringing for a Boston debutante." "I was an uncommon debutante," Grace admitted. "Never quite fit the mold expected of me." "Their loss," Howard said quietly. Our gain. The simple statement, delivered with such sincerity, touched Grace deeply. In Boston, her interests and intelligence had been tolerated as eccentricities to be corrected through marriage. Here, standing in a Nevada stable with straw clinging to her skirts, she was valued for the very qualities that had marked her as different. They continued through the stables, Howard pointing out particular horses and explaining his breeding philosophy. Grace asked knowledgeable questions, earning appreciative nods from Howard. "I've overwhelmed you with horse talk," he said eventually. "My apologies." "Not at all. It's refreshing to discuss something I understand." She hesitated. "Howard, may I ask you something personal?" He nodded, his expression open. "Martha mentioned you were married once." Pain flickered across his features, but he didn't avoid her gaze. "Yes, Eleanor and I had 6 years together, and 4 months with our son, William." "I'm sorry for your loss," Grace said softly. "Truly." "It was a long time ago," Howard replied, though his eyes suggested the wound remained fresh. "Eleanor would have liked you. She valued straightforwardness and courage, qualities you possess in abundance." The comparison to his late wife startled Grace. It suggested Howard had thought of her in ways beyond mere friendship. Before she could respond, voices approached the stable, other guests coming to admire the horses. The private moment dissolved as Howard greeted his neighbors with practiced hospitality. As the evening progressed, Grace found herself watching Howard interact with his guests. He moved with quiet confidence among them, respected not for wealth or position, but for his character and competence. It was a different sort of social hierarchy than Boston's rigid structure, and Grace found she preferred it immensely. The harvest gathering concluded as the autumn night grew chilly. Guests departed in wagons and on horseback, calling thanks and farewells as they left. Grace and Martha were among the last to leave. "Thank you for coming," Howard said as he helped them into the wagon. "Both of you." His hand lingered on Grace's as he assisted her. "Perhaps you might ride Aurora again sometime," he added quietly. "She's missed you." "I'd like that," Grace replied, her voice equally soft. The journey back to Virginia City was quiet, most passengers drowsy from food and dancing. Grace's mind, however, was alert with new impressions and feelings she hadn't experienced in a very long time, perhaps ever. "He's sweet on you," Martha murmured beside her. "And unless I'm mistaken, the feeling's mutual." Grace didn't deny it. "It's complicated. Isn't it always?" Martha patted her hand. "But complications have a way of working themselves out when two people are determined enough." Grace wished she could share Martha's optimism, but the specter of her past loomed large. Randall Pierce's presence in Virginia City was a stark reminder that her disgrace could become public knowledge at any moment. The following days brought an unexpected development. Randall Pierce appeared at Millicent's store, ostensibly to purchase sundries but clearly with the intention of speaking to Grace. "A moment of your time," he requested, his tone less aggressive than during their street encounter. Grace glanced at Millicent, who was helping another customer and paying them no mind. "Briefly, Mr. Pierce." "I'm returning to Boston tomorrow," he informed her. "Business concluded sooner than expected." Relief washed through her. "I wish you a safe journey." "Before I go, I wanted to make you aware of something." He lowered his voice. "Edward is engaged again to Margaret Lowell. The wedding is set for spring." The news shouldn't have affected her, yet Grace felt a strange disorientation. Edward had moved on completely while she remained defined by his actions against her. "I wish them happiness," she said stiffly. Randall studied her. "You've built something here," he observed. "A life of sorts." "Yes. It would be a shame for that to be disrupted." His tone made the statement a thinly veiled threat. Grace met his gaze evenly. "What do you want?" Mr. Pierce, your father still holds significant interest in mining investments I'm currently managing. A word from his daughter about promising opportunities in Nevada could be beneficial. Understanding dawned. You want me to write to my father to endorse your ventures here. A simple letter. In exchange, I see no reason Boston society need learn of your frontier activities. The manipulation was blatant, yet Grace found herself considering it. Not out of fear for herself, she had already weathered the worst society could inflict, but to protect the fragile new connections she'd formed in Virginia City, particularly with Howard. I'll consider it, she said finally. When do you need my answer? I leave on tomorrow's noon stage. I'm staying at the International Hotel. After he left, Grace continued her sewing mechanically, her mind churning with the implications of Randall's proposal. Writing such a letter would mean reconnecting with her father, the man who had believed Edward's lies and cast her out without a hearing. It would also mean implicitly supporting what might well be dubious business practices. Yet the alternative, having her past scandal exposed in her new home, was equally unpalatable. Virginia City might be more forgiving than Boston in many ways, but a woman's reputation remained precious currency even here. That evening, Grace walked along C Street, needing solitude to clear her thoughts. The autumn air was brisk, carrying the scent of wood smoke and the promise of winter. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her pace quickening as the temperature dropped with the sun. Miss Fairchild. She turned to find Howard dismounting from Vulcan outside the assay office. His presence was unexpected but not unwelcome. Mr. Fairmont. She smiled despite her troubled thoughts. What brings you to town so soon after your gathering? Business at the bank, he replied, falling into step beside her. And the pleasure of seeing you, if I'm honest. The direct statement warmed her. I was just taking some air before returning to the boarding house. May I join you? I find walking helps clear my mind when decisions weigh heavily. Grace glanced at him sharply. What makes you think I have decisions to make? The furrow between your brows, he said, his tone gentle, and the way you're wringing your hands beneath your shawl. She hadn't realized her distress was so evident. You're observant. Only about things that matter. They walked in silence for a while, reaching the edge of town where buildings gave way to the vast darkness of the desert beyond. Above them, stars emerged in a dazzling display impossible to see in Boston's gas-lit nights. I saw your Boston acquaintance leaving Millicent's today, Howard said finally. Grace tensed. Mr. Pierce is departing for Boston tomorrow. That's brought you relief, but also some new concern. She stopped walking, turning to face him directly. Howard, there are things about my past you don't know, things that would change your opinion of me. Few things in this world are that powerful, Grace. His use of her first name sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening chill. You say that because you don't know. Then tell me. The invitation was simple but profound. Grace looked up at the stars, gathering courage. I was engaged in Boston, she began. To Edward Harrington, heir to a shipping fortune and considered an excellent match. The wedding was set for June last year. Howard listened without interrupting, his expression attentive but neutral. 2 weeks before the wedding, Edward changed his mind. But rather than simply breaking the engagement, which would have reflected poorly on him, he created a scandal. Her voice faltered. He claimed to have found me in a compromising position with his driver. He paid the man to corroborate his story. But it wasn't true, Howard stated rather than asked. No, Grace wrapped her arms around herself. The truth was that Edward had found someone with a larger dowry. But his accusation was believed even by my father. In Boston society, a woman's denial means nothing against a man's claim. So you came west. I had no choice. My father gave me enough money for passage and told me not to return. Howard was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was tight with controlled anger. This man Pierce, he threatened to expose this story here. Not explicitly, but he made it clear that my silence on certain matters would ensure his regarding my past. Blackmail, then. Grace nodded. He wants me to write to my father endorsing some mining investments Pierce is managing. And will you? She sighed. I don't know. Part of me wants to refuse on principle, but another part is afraid of losing what you've built here, Howard finished for her. Yes. She looked directly at him. I've found something in Virginia City I never had in Boston. Respect, purpose, perhaps even. She trailed off, unable to articulate the fragile hope that had begun to grow within her. Howard stepped closer, his eyes holding hers. Grace, Virginia City isn't Boston. People here judge by actions, not rumors. You've proven yourself through honest work and kindness. That matters more than any story Pierce could tell. Even to you, she whispered. Especially to me. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. I've watched you rebuild your life from whatever ashes brought you here. That takes courage few possess. Grace felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Thank you for believing me. I'd be a poor judge of character indeed if I couldn't recognize the truth in someone like you. Howard's hand remained holding hers. Don't write that letter, Grace. Don't let fear of the past dictate your future. His confidence strengthened her resolve. I won't. They walked back toward town, their conversation turning to lighter topics: the coming winter, plans for the next year's foals, Millicent's increasingly poor eyesight. Yet beneath the casual exchange ran a current of deeper understanding. Grace had revealed her darkest secret, and Howard had accepted it without judgment. At the boarding house steps, they paused. The street was quiet, most businesses closed for the night. Thank you for walking with me, Grace said, and for listening. Thank you for trusting me with your story. Howard hesitated, then added, I'd like to call on you properly if you'd permit it. The formal request took her by surprise. You want to court me? I do. His directness was refreshing after Boston's elaborate social rituals. I've admired you since you first arrived in Virginia City, your resilience, your kindness, your way with horses. This last was added with a smile. But I understand if you're not ready. Grace considered his offer. The prudent response would be to ask for time, to ensure Randall Pierce had truly departed, before allowing herself to form attachments that might be threatened by her past. Yet standing there in the crisp autumn night, looking at Howard's earnest expression, prudence seemed far less important than honesty. I would like that very much, she said. Howard's smile was worth any risk. Then I'll call for you on Sunday. Perhaps we could ride out to the foothills. I'd enjoy that. He lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Good night, Grace. Good night, Howard. Grace watched him mount Vulcan and ride away, his straight-backed figure gradually disappearing into the darkness. Inside, Martha was waiting with a knowing look but mercifully few questions. The following day, Grace stood near the stage depot as the noon coach prepared for departure. She made no effort to conceal her presence as Randall Pierce supervised the loading of his luggage. He noticed her and approached, expression curious. Have you brought a letter, Miss Fairchild? No, Mr. Pierce. She met his gaze steadily. I will not be writing to my father on your behalf. His face hardened. Consider carefully what you're risking. I have. And I've decided some risks are worth taking. Your reputation is built on my actions here, not gossip from Boston. She straightened her shoulders. Do what you will, Mr. Pierce. Virginia City is my home now, and these people know me for who I truly am. For a moment, Randall appeared taken aback by her resolve. Then he shrugged. Very well. It's your choice to make. He studied her with newfound curiosity. You've changed, Grace. There's a strength in you that wasn't evident in Boston. Perhaps it was always there, waiting for the right circumstances. The stagecoach driver called for passengers. Randall nodded a curt farewell and climbed aboard. Grace remained until the coach disappeared in a cloud of dust, carrying with it the last direct connection to her Boston disgrace. She felt lighter somehow, as if a burden had been set down. Whether Randall would follow through on his implicit threat remained to be seen, but she had faced her fear and chosen integrity over capitulation. The decision alone was liberating. Sunday dawned clear and cool. Howard arrived at the boarding house promptly at 10, riding Vulcan and leading Aurora. Grace had worn her most practical dress, a simple blue cotton that wouldn't restrict her movement on horseback. They rode into the foothills east of town, following game trails through golden aspen groves and stands of fragrant pine. Howard pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area's early days, when silver seekers had first discovered the Comstock lode. My claim was further north, he said as they paused to rest the horses by a small stream. Not silver copper, looked promising at first. Is that what Walton meant about you losing everything on a failed claim? Grace asked, recalling the confrontation at the miners' jubilee. Howard nodded. I invested heavily, too heavily. When the vein played out, I nearly lost the ranch, had to sell off most of my stock to keep the land. That must have been difficult. It was. He skimmed a stone across the water's surface. But starting over taught me what matters. The horses I have now, they're better stock than what I lost, built on quality rather than quantity. Grace recognized the philosophy applied to more than his breeding program. You've created something remarkable, Howard. He looked at her with warmth that made her breath catch. I'm beginning to believe that again. They continued their ride, climbing higher into the foothills. Near midday, they reached an overlook with a spectacular view of the valley below. Virginia City was visible in the distance, its buildings mere specks from this elevation. Howard spread a blanket on a flat rock, and they shared a simple picnic of bread, cheese, and apples he'd brought in his saddlebags. The conversation flowed easily between them, covering books they'd both read, memories of places they'd seen, and hopes for the future. I want to expand the breeding program, Howard said, describing his vision. Create a line of horses uniquely suited to Western conditions, strong enough for ranch work, but with the refinement and intelligence of Eastern stock. It's a worthy ambition, Grace replied. And clearly within your capabilities. What about you? What do you hope for? The question gave her pause. For so long, her focus had been on survival and rebuilding, with little thought given to dreams or aspirations. I suppose I'd like to establish a proper dressmaking business eventually, she said. Something beyond mending and alterations. I enjoy creating beautiful things. You'd be good at it. You have an eye for detail and quality. Thank you, she smiled. It's strange to think of the future as something to plan for rather than something to fear. Howard's expression grew serious. I hope I'm part of that future, Grace. The directness of his statement both thrilled and frightened her. I hope so too, she admitted. But Howard, we've known each other only a short time. True. Yet I feel I know the essence of you, your courage, your integrity, your kindness. He took her hand. The rest is just details to be discovered over time. Put that way, it made perfect sense. Grace had spent years in Boston society where couples might socialize for seasons before forming attachments, yet often remained strangers to each other's true character. With Howard, the important things, values, principles, mutual respect were already evident. You make it sound simple, she said. Not simple. His thumb traced circles on her palm, but clear. The touch sent warmth spreading through her. There on the mountainside, far from prying eyes, Grace allowed herself to acknowledge the depth of her feelings for this quiet, honorable man. They remained at the overlook until the afternoon shadows lengthened, reluctant to end their time together but mindful of the journey back to town. As they prepared to leave, Howard helped Grace mount Aurora, his hands lingering at her waist slightly longer than necessary. The ride down the mountain was taken at a leisurely pace, both of them aware that this special day was drawing to a close. When Virginia City came into view, Grace felt a curious mixture of belonging and anticipation. This place that had once been merely a refuge was becoming truly home, largely because of the man riding beside her. At the boarding house, Howard helped her dismount. "May I call on you again Wednesday?" he asked. "There's a lecture at the Miners' Union Hall about new breeding techniques from Europe. Thought you might find it interesting." "I would, thank you." Martha opened the door, giving them a knowing smile before tactfully retreating inside. In the brief moment of privacy, Howard stepped closer. "I've had a wonderful day, Grace, as have I." He hesitated, then leaned forward and placed a gentle kiss on her cheek. "Until Wednesday." Grace watched him ride away, her hand rising to touch the spot where his lips had brushed her skin. The gesture had been proper yet intimate, like Howard himself, respectful of boundaries while making his intentions clear. Inside, Martha was waiting in the kitchen, pretending to be busy with dinner preparations. "Good day, was it?" she asked, failing to hide her curiosity. "Lovely," Grace replied, unable to suppress her smile. Howard Fairmont isn't one for casual courtships, you know." Martha gave her a meaningful look. "When he sets his mind on something or someone, he's steadfast." The observation brought both joy and trepidation. Grace was developing deep feelings for Howard, but the shadow of her past still loomed. Though Randall Pierce had departed, the truth he carried could still reach Virginia City through letters or future visitors from Boston. "Martha," she said hesitantly, "if you heard something unsavory about my past, would it change how you see me?" The older woman stopped her work and turned to face Grace directly. "Child, I've lived long enough to know that people are rarely what rumors make them out to be. It's what I see with my own eyes that matters." "And what do you see?" "A young woman of character who works hard, treats others kindly, and has brought life back into Howard Fairmont's eyes." Martha squeezed her hand. "The rest is just noise." Grace blinked back sudden tears. "Thank you. Now help me with these potatoes. Howard won't be impressed if you can't cook as well as you can sew." The following weeks deepened the connection between Grace and Howard. They attended the breeding lecture together, rode on his ranch whenever weather permitted, and shared quiet conversations by the boarding house hearth on cold evenings. Howard introduced Grace to his friends and neighbors, treating her with a respect that clearly signaled his intentions to the community. For her part, Grace found herself opening up more than she had with anyone since before her disgrace. She told Howard about her childhood in Boston, her brother's death in the war, and her complicated relationship with parents who had valued social standing above all else. Howard shared his own history, his Pennsylvania upbringing on a modest farm, his reluctant service in the Union Army, and his migration west seeking space to heal from war's wounds. He spoke of Alina with reverence, but without the raw grief that might have indicated he remained trapped in the past. As November progressed, preparations for winter occupied much of Virginia City. Howard spent long days ensuring his ranch and horses were ready for the harsh months ahead, while Grace found herself busy with sewing orders for winter garments. Despite their full schedules, they made time for each other. Howard began joining Grace and Martha for Sunday dinners at the boarding house, bringing vegetables from his root cellar or game from his occasional hunting trips. These simple gatherings became the highlight of Grace's week. One Sunday in late November, Howard arrived with news. The Silver State Courier is looking for someone to write a weekly column on ladies' fashion, he told Grace over dinner. I mentioned your knowledge of Eastern styles to the editor. Grace was surprised by the thoughtful suggestion. I've never written for publication. You express yourself beautifully in conversation, Howard replied, and it would be a way to establish your expertise beyond mending work. The opportunity was intriguing. Writing such a column might help Grace build the foundation for the dressmaking business she hoped to establish. Thank you for thinking of me, she said. I'll visit the newspaper office tomorrow. The editor, a harried man named Frederick Winters, was initially skeptical of Grace's qualifications, but became more interested when she demonstrated her knowledge of fashion history and construction techniques. By the end of their meeting, he had commissioned a sample column with the promise of regular work if it met his standards. Grace wrote the piece that evening, combining practical advice for adapting Eastern fashions to frontier conditions with illustrations of simple modifications to existing garments. When she delivered it the next day, Winters read it immediately and offered her the position on the spot. This is exactly what our female readers need, he declared. Sensible guidance from someone who understands both fashion and frontier realities. The weekly column, titled Grace Notes on Style, became an unexpected success. Women throughout the territory wrote to the paper with questions and appreciation, and Grace found herself recognized on the streets of Virginia City as more than just the seamstress at Millicent's. Howard couldn't have been prouder. You found your voice, he told her after the third column was published. It suits you. December arrived with a heavy snowfall that transformed Virginia City into a scene from a Christmas card. The mountains surrounding the town were blanketed in white, and icicles hung from every eave. Despite the cold, Grace found the season brought a warmth of community she'd never experienced in Boston's formal holiday observances. The boarding house became a gathering place as Martha hosted an informal Christmas celebration. Neighbors and friends crowded into the main room, bringing food and small gifts to share. Howard arrived early to help arrange furniture and build up the fire, working alongside Grace with the comfortable familiarity of a man who felt at home. As the evening progressed, someone produced a fiddle and impromptu dancing began in the cleared space. Howard led Grace through a waltz, holding her closer than propriety might strictly allow, though no one seemed to mind. I have something for you, he said as the music ended. Not for public giving. Intrigued, Grace followed him to the relative privacy of the kitchen. From his pocket, Howard produced a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Merry Christmas, Grace. She unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, lay a silver brooch shaped like a horse in mid-gallop, its lines capturing the essence of movement and freedom. Howard, it's beautiful. She lifted it reverently. I had it made from silver from my old claim, he explained. The last bit I kept. The significance of the gift fashioned from the very material that had once cost him so dearly moved her deeply. I don't know what to say. Say you'll wear it. His voice grew softer. And that you'll consider a future where you might wear my ring as well. Grace looked up sharply, her heart hammering. Howard. Not a formal proposal, not yet, he clarified, but a declaration of intent. I love you, Grace Fairchild. I want to build a life with you. The words she had longed to hear yet feared might never come hung in the air between them. Grace searched his face, finding nothing but sincere devotion in his steady gaze. I love you too, she whispered, the admission bringing both relief and joy. "But Howard, are you certain? My past is just that past." He took her hands. "I'm not asking for your answer tonight. Only that you'll think on it." She nodded, emotion making speech difficult. Howard leaned forward and kissed her gently, their first true kiss, tasting of mulled cider and promise. They rejoined the gathering, Grace wearing the silver brooch on her collar. Martha noticed it immediately, her knowing smile suggesting she understood its significance. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of music, laughter, and shared stories. Grace found herself watching Howard as he conversed with neighbors, admiring the quiet confidence with which he carried himself. The possibility of a future as his wife, of belonging fully to this community, and to him, filled her with tentative hope. Yet as she prepared for bed that night, doubt crept in. Howard deserved a wife without scandal attached to her name. What if someday, somehow, the truth of her Boston disgrace reached Virginia City? Would his love withstand the gossip and judgment that might follow? Sleep came fitfully, troubled by dreams of Boston drawing rooms where whispers followed her like shadows. The new year of 1876 arrived with a bitter cold snap that kept most of Virginia City indoors. Grace continued her column for the newspaper, expanded her sewing business to include custom garments, and spent every available moment with Howard. Their courtship progressed steadily through January and February. Howard became a fixture at the boarding house, often arriving with books he thought Grace might enjoy or specimens of interesting rocks he found on his property. In turn, Grace began riding out to his ranch whenever weather permitted, helping with indoor tasks and spending hours discussing plans for spring foaling season. By March, most of Virginia City recognized them as a couple, and speculation about a wedding announcement grew. Grace found herself both exhilarated by the possibility and anxious about taking such a definitive step. Howard, true to his word, had not pressed for an answer to his Christmas declaration. Yet his actions spoke clearly of his intentions, introducing Grace to distant connections who visited, consulting her on ranch decisions, discussing future improvements to his house. The turning point came in early April, as the first signs of spring began to appear in Nevada's rugged landscape. Grace had ridden out to the ranch to see a new foal, Aurora's first, sired by Vulcan. The gangly colt showed promise of inheriting the best qualities of both parents. "What will you name him?" Grace asked as they watched the foal nurse. "I thought you might do the honor," Howard replied. The suggestion touched her. "Truly, he's as much yours as mine. You've helped plan his bloodlines, discussed his potential since before he was born." Grace studied the colt's conformation. "Phoenix," she said finally, "for rising new from the ashes." Howard's eyes reflected understanding of the deeper meaning behind her choice. Perfect. They spent the afternoon checking on other pregnant mares and planning the season's breeding schedule. As the sun began to set, Howard suggested they ride to the overlook where they had shared their first picnic months earlier. The view was different in spring. Patches of snow still clung to shadowed areas, but green shoots were emerging from the soil, and the air carried the scent of renewal. They sat on the same flat rock, now warmed by the day's sunshine. "I've been thinking," Howard said after a comfortable silence, "about expanding the house before next winter." "Oh," Grace tried to sound casual, though her heart had begun to race. "It needs another bedroom. And the kitchen's too small for a family." She met his gaze. "A family, that's my hope." Howard took her hands. "Grace, I've given you time to consider what I said at Christmas. I won't rush you, but I need to know, can you see yourself sharing my life, my home, my future?" The directness of the question demanded equal honesty in response. Grace had spent months weighing her fears against her hopes, her past against her potential future. "I can," she said softly. "I want that more than anything." Howard's face lit with joy, but Grace continued, needing to express her remaining concern. "But Howard, there's still the matter of my reputation. If word ever reached Virginia City about Boston, Grace," he interrupted gently, "I've thought about this too, and I realized something important." He squeezed her hands. "If such rumors ever did surface, they would be about a stranger, not the woman Virginia City has come to know and respect, not the woman I love. You can't be certain how people would react." "No, but I am certain how I would react." His eyes held hers steadily. "With unwavering support and pride in the woman who has become essential to my happiness." The absolute conviction in his voice dissolved the last of Grace's doubts. Whatever the future might bring, they would face it together, not as a scandalous Boston debutante and a struggling rancher, but as partners who had found in each other the strength to begin anew. "Then yes," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Yes, Howard, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms, his kiss deeper and more passionate than their previous careful exchanges. Grace responded with equal fervor, years of restraint giving way to genuine emotion. When they finally parted, Howard reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small object. "I've carried this for weeks, waiting for the right moment." In his palm lay a ring, not the ostentatious diamond her Boston engagement had featured, but a simple gold band set with a small pearl surrounded by tiny silver flecks. "The pearl was Alina's," Howard said quietly. "The silver is from my claim. I hope you don't mind the pearl being hers. It seemed right somehow, a connection between past and future." Grace was deeply moved by the thoughtfulness behind the design. "It's perfect," she said as he slipped it onto her finger. "A testament to all that's brought us to this moment." They remained at the Overlook until twilight deepened into dusk, making plans for their shared future. They would marry in June, allowing time for modest preparations. Grace would continue her newspaper column and sewing, possibly expanding into a proper shop once they were established. Howard would focus on building his breeding program, with Grace as his full partner in the enterprise. The ride back to town was filled with a quiet joy. At the boarding house, Martha took one look at them and broke into a wide smile. "About time," she said, spotting the ring on Grace's hand. "I was beginning to think I'd need to lock you two in the cellar until you came to your senses." Howard laughed. "We got there on our own, Martha. Though I appreciate your patience." News of their engagement spread quickly through Virginia City. To Grace's relief and gratitude, it was met with universal approval. Even George Walton, when encountering them on C Street, offered gruff congratulations. The weeks leading to their June wedding passed in a blur of preparations. Grace sewed her own wedding dress, a practical but elegant blue silk that could be worn for other occasions afterward. Howard expanded the ranch house kitchen and added a second bedroom as promised. Their wedding day dawned clear and warm. They exchanged vows in Virginia City's small church, surrounded by neighbors and friends who had become like family. Martha stood beside Grace, while Miguel served as Howard's best man. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Howard's kiss was both tender and possessive, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration afterward was held at their ranch, now truly theirs together. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food contributed by nearly every household in the community. Music, dancing, and laughter continued well into the evening. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land that was now her home, Grace found a moment of quiet with her new husband. "Happy?" Howard asked, his arm around her waist. She leaned against his solid strength. thinking of the journey that had brought her to this moment, the pain and disgrace that had driven her west, the courage it had taken to start again, and the love that had blossomed in this unlikely place. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "Though I still can't quite believe this is my life now." "Believe it." Howard's voice was warm with promise. "This is just the beginning, Grace Fairmont." Her new name sounded right, a symbol of the fresh start she had found. As guests began to depart, calling good wishes and congratulations, Grace and Howard stood together on the porch of their home, facing the future they would shape together. Later that night, as moonlight spilled through the bedroom window of the ranch house, Grace lay in Howard's arms, her body still tingling from their first intimate encounter as husband and wife. The tenderness and passion they had shared confirmed what she already knew, that in every way that mattered, they were perfectly matched. "What are you thinking?" Howard asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I've never felt so completely at home," she replied honestly. "With you, with this place, with myself." He kissed her forehead. "That's all I've ever wanted to give you, a place to belong without fear or pretense." Grace thought of the long journey that had brought her to this moment, not just the physical distance from Boston to Nevada, but the emotional terrain she had traversed, from shame to self-respect, from isolation to connection. "Do you know," she said softly, "when I first arrived in Virginia City, I was convinced no one would ever want me again, that my disgrace had made me unworthy of love." Howard propped himself up on one elbow, his expression serious. "And now I understand that worth isn't bestowed by others' opinions. It's inherent." She touched his face. "But having someone who sees that worth clearly, that's a gift beyond measure." "I see you, Grace Fairmont." Howard's voice was husky with emotion. "I always will." As they drifted toward sleep in each other's arms, Grace felt a profound sense of completion. The broken pieces of her life had not just been mended, but transformed into something stronger and more beautiful than before, like kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing pottery with gold to highlight rather than hide the breaks. The months following their wedding brought both challenges and joys. Summer heat gave way to autumn crispness, and Grace settled into her role as ranch wife while maintaining her newspaper column and sewing business. Howard's breeding program flourished under their joint management, with several Eastern buyers expressing interest in their unique stock. By Christmas, they had more cause for celebration. Grace was expecting their first child in the late spring. Howard's joy at the news was boundless. He spent hours adapting the nursery, crafting a cradle from pine harvested on their land, and reading everything available about childcare. "You'd think no one had ever had a baby before," Grace teased as he consulted yet another manual on infant development. "No one has ever had our baby before," he replied with such earnestness that she had to kiss him. The winter of 1876-77 was harsh, with snowstorms isolating the ranch for days at a time. Yet Grace found these periods of enforced closeness deepened their bond. Evenings were spent reading to each other by lamplight, planning for the coming year, or simply enjoying comfortable silence in each other's company. As her pregnancy progressed, Grace was touched by the community's support. Martha visited regularly, bringing herbal teas and practical advice. Millicent organized the ladies of Virginia City to prepare a baby-welcoming basket filled with handmade items for the infant. Even Howard's ranch hands took special care around her, constructing a sheltered walkway between the house and barn so she could safely visit the horses regardless of weather. Spring arrived with its usual Nevada drama, days of warmth followed by sudden snow squalls, all against a backdrop of mountains still capped with white. Grace's time grew near, and Howard arranged for the doctor to stay at a neighboring ranch for the final weeks, ensuring medical help would be available when needed. On a clear May morning in 1877, after a night of labor attended by Martha, Dr. Simmons, and a visibly anxious Howard, Grace gave birth to a healthy son. They named him Thomas William Fairmont, Thomas for Grace's fallen brother, William for Howard's lost son. "He has your eyes," Howard whispered as he held his son for the first time, voice thick with emotion. "And your spirit, I'd wager." "As long as he has your heart," Grace replied, exhausted but radiant with happiness. News of Thomas's birth spread quickly through Virginia City. Visitors arrived bearing gifts and good wishes, each welcomed into the Fairmont home with hospitality that had become their hallmark. As spring melded into summer, Grace gradually resumed her activities, adapting to motherhood with the same determination she had brought to every challenge. Thomas proved to be a good-natured infant, content to sleep in a basket near her as she wrote her column or worked on sewing projects. Howard doted on his son, often carrying him in a sling while tending to ranch chores. "He needs to learn the business from the ground up," he explained when Grace expressed amusement at the sight of their tiny son, supervising horse training sessions. By Thomas's first birthday, the Fairmont Ranch had expanded to include additional grazing land and a new stable. Their horse breeding program had gained regional recognition, with inquiries coming from as far away as California and Colorado. Grace's fashion column had been syndicated to newspapers in Carson City and Reno, and she had opened a small dressmaking shop in a corner of their ranch house, employing 2 apprentices from Virginia City. Life settled into a rhythm of purposeful work and domestic contentment. Grace and Howard complemented each other's strengths and supported each other's dreams with unwavering commitment. Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's quiet confidence and his mother's inquisitive nature. In the autumn of 1879, Grace received a letter that momentarily shook her hard-won serenity. The Boston postmark brought immediate tension, which only increased when she recognized her father's handwriting. Howard found her on the porch, the unopened letter in her lap. "Bad news?" he asked, sitting beside her. "I don't know yet." She showed him the envelope. "It's from my father, first communication in over 4 years. He took her hand. "Whatever it contains, we'll face it together." Drawing strength from his presence, Grace opened the letter. As she read, her expression shifted from apprehension to disbelief. "He's apologizing," she said, her voice unsteady. "Edward's wife Margaret apparently confessed the truth about what happened. It seems she developed a conscience after their son was born." Howard remained silent, allowing her to process this unexpected development. "My father writes that he was wrong to doubt me, that he regrets his actions." She looked up, eyes bright with unshed tears. "He asks for forgiveness and wants to know his grandson. How do you feel about that?" Howard asked carefully. Grace considered the question. 4 years earlier, such validation would have meant everything to her. Now, it felt important but not essential to her happiness. I think I forgave him long ago, though I didn't realize it." She folded the letter. "Virginia City taught me that true family isn't always blood, but Thomas should know his grandfather if possible." Howard nodded. "Then we'll invite him to visit, on our terms." "Our terms," Grace agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "This is our home, our life." He would be a welcome addition, but not a defining presence. They wrote to Mr. Fairchild that evening, a joint letter expressing willingness to renew contact while making clear that the Fairmonts were established and content in Nevada. They included a daguerreotype of Thomas and invited her father to visit the following spring. The correspondence that followed was cautious at first. gradually warming as Grace's father expressed genuine interest in their lives and sincere remorse for his past actions. By the time he arrived for his visit in April 1880, a foundation for reconciliation had been laid. Gregory Fairchild proved to be humbled by experience and genuinely eager to know his daughter's family. Though initially taken aback by the relative simplicity of ranch life compared to Boston luxury, he quickly adapted and even seemed to enjoy the change of pace. "You've built something remarkable here," he told Grace one evening as they watched Howard teaching Thomas to gentle a pony. "Something real." "We have," she agreed, her hand resting on her stomach where their second child, a daughter they would name Anew Martha, was beginning to make her presence known. "It wasn't the life I was raised to expect, but it's far better than anything I could have imagined." Her father's visit lasted 3 weeks, ending with promises of annual trips and regular correspondence. As the stagecoach carried him back toward the transcontinental railroad that would return him east, Grace felt a sense of completion, the final piece of her past finding its proper place in the mosaic of her present. Standing on their porch that evening, Howard's arm around her waist and Thomas playing at their feet, Grace gazed out at the land that had offered her refuge and rebirth. The Nevada sunset painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple, a daily miracle she never tired of witnessing. "No regrets?" Howard asked quietly, as if reading her contemplative mood. Grace turned to look at her husband, this man who had seen her value when she doubted it herself, who had offered not rescue but partnership, who had built with her a life of purpose and joy. "Not one," she replied, lifting her face for his kiss as the sun slipped behind the Sierra Nevada, closing another day in a life reclaimed and reimagined under western skies. Years later, on their 20th wedding anniversary in 1896, Howard and Grace hosted a celebration at their now prosperous ranch. Friends and family gathered to honor the couple whose partnership had become legendary in the region. Their children, Thomas, now 19 and studying veterinary medicine in California, Anew, 16 and showing her mother's talent for design, and Robert, 13 and already demonstrating his father's gift with horses, had arranged a surprise renewal of vows. As Grace and Howard stood together under an arbor constructed by their sons, surrounded by the community that had embraced them and the family they had created, Grace was struck by how far she had traveled from that dust-covered, desperate young woman who had arrived in Virginia City with nothing but a tarnished reputation and fading hope. "I remember the day I first truly saw you," Howard said, departing from the formal vows to speak from his heart. "You were mending a shirt at Millicent's, and I thought to myself, there's a woman who knows how to repair what's broken. Little did I know you would teach me to rebuild what I thought was lost forever." Grace blinked back tears. "And I remember a man who looked at a scandalized Boston exile and saw not damage but possibility." She squeezed his hands. "You knelt beside Aurora that day at the Miners' Jubilee and told me she missed me. What you couldn't know was how much I needed to be missed, to be wanted, to be seen." Howard's voice grew husky with emotion. "I've been waiting all my life for you, Grace Fairmont. 20 years together has only confirmed what I knew the moment you first rode Aurora, that you were meant to be by my side." As they sealed their renewed commitment with a kiss, cheers erupted from the assembled guests. Grace looked out at the faces of those who had become Family Martha, now in her 80s but still sharp-witted, Millicent's daughter who had taken over the general store, ranch hands who had stayed loyal for decades, neighbors who had celebrated every birth and supported them through every hardship. This was the legacy they had built together, not just a successful ranch or a respected name, but a life defined by integrity, perseverance, and love that had overcome every obstacle. Later that night, as they sat alone on their porch watching the stars emerge over the land that had nurtured their dreams, Howard took Grace's hand, his thumb brushing over the wedding band that had not left her finger in 20 years. "Do you remember what you said when you arrived in Virginia City?" he asked. "Martha told me later that you cried to her, 'No one will want me now.'" Grace nodded, the memory distant but not forgotten. "I believed it with my whole heart." Howard lifted her hand to his lips. "I knew better. From the moment I saw you, I recognized a woman worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth building a life with." His green eyes, still vibrant despite the silver now threading his dark hair, held hers. "I've been waiting for you my whole life, Grace. These 20 years have been just the beginning." Under the vast Nevada sky, where stars shone with a clarity impossible in eastern cities, Grace Fairmont leaned against her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that sometimes the most painful journeys lead to the most beautiful destinations, and that true love isn't found in perfection, but in the willingness to see beyond flaws to the essential worth within. "To beginnings," she whispered, raising her face for his kiss, "and to all the chapters yet to be written."